You're airsick, Lowlander, Rock said with his thick accent. You wish to die? Why do you not just go leap into the chasm? That would be easier. I'm bridge leader. It's my privilege to run at the front.
Welcome to The Storming Journey, a sacred text reading of The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This podcast may contain spoilers for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Storming Journey. As we cover Chapter 17 of The Way of Kings, I'm Elle, and I will be your Ardent for the episode.
I'm Liz, and I'm today's Worldsinger.
And I'm Adam, and I'm today's Veristitalian.
Okay. Since Elle gave us the theme of mercy for this episode, I have been racking my brain for what to do for World Singing. And for a while, I was like, I'll just cop out. There's so many great literary examples of mercy. I was like, we could do Merchant of Venice. We could talk about Les Mis. We could do Corrie ten Boom. All of these are great classic stories of offering mercy instead of justice. And then I remembered one from my life that is kind of embarrassing. But I'm going to share it with you anyway. This is when I must have been in 10th grade, so a sophomore. I was taking pre-calculus, and I would have never been a very diligent student about homework. I cared more about learning stuff than completing assignments and grades, which I am now being duly punished for as a parent. So in my pre-calculus class, I turned in basically no homework, still got A's on the tests, but that meant that I was getting a D in the class, which was not a great look for my mostly A's and B's GPA. And so I humbled myself and went and asked my pre-calculus professor, like, hey, I understand this stuff, and I'm sorry I didn't turn in any of the homework. Can you please change this to a pass instead of a D so it won't get factored into my GPA? And she did. And that meant a lot to me, and it probably didn't matter at all to her. But at that time in my life, I felt like it was the end of the world that I got this D, and having that burden lifted off of me meant a lot to me at that time in my life. So yeah, that is my story about asking for mercy. It is something that I think more people should do, but it is it's pretty hard to ask for it.
You're now a teacher, Liz, so you know that teacher either didn't care or cared way too much about giving you the pass. There's no in between. No in between. It's either they don't care at all or they care a lot about that small little power. So for today's Storm's Eye View, I didn't write it out, so we're going to do this from the top of my head, basically. I wrote out 10 bullet points. They're not 10 sentences. They're not 100 words, so we'll see how long this goes. It's already gone beyond 100 words, but that's how I write. That's how I talk. That's how everything goes for me. It's the Sanderson virus. It spreads. Brief aside on that, for my PhD exams, the essays were meant to be 10 pages. I turned in 3 20-pagers because I was just I got to write finally. Let me write my own ideas. And my committee was like, you wrote too much. And I was like, just pass me. But Storm's Eye View. Let's get to that nice little top of the storm. So Kaladin goes to visit an apothecary. He has a nice conversation with that apothecary, and there are things that will be found out about in later chapters sprinkled in there. He really wants to find a way to help care for the people on the bridge run. And so he's trying to find a way to heal his sick. When he returns to the bridge, a call goes out saying that they're going to go on a bridge run. They take the bridge and they run, and they finally come across the Parshindi, where Kaladin switches out to be the front because he feels as a bridge leader he needs to be in front of the bridge. He sends Rock, who, foreshadow from last episode, has now appeared. He sends him back to the back. And on the run, as he's running down to lay the bridge and face the Parshindi, he bellows Tien. After they have laid the bridge, and they go back. Kaladin goes and finds all the wounded. Hobber has taken an arrow to the leg. Gadal dies, even though Kaladin tries to save him with a lot of his surgeon technique. He is able to somewhat save Hobber and David, and then he goes and asks Gaz to if he can take the wounded home with them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, after that entire fight, he realizes that the day has set and the sun has set, that it's very red and bloody. And I am now rambling, so I'm going to stop the storm's eye view. It was a very pattering of a rain of a storm's eye view, shall we say. There wasn't quite a high storm of a storm's eye view.
Yeah, this is why I said 100 words. It's okay. Every once in a while, it's okay. Nice to have a nice little trickle instead of a burst of rain. So I'm going to be completely honest. I picked this theme without rereading the chapter. And then I read the chapter and I was like, that was a choice I made. This is a little harder than I thought. Sometimes it's real easy when I pick a theme and it's just like right there on the page. But this one was a little bit harder to dig for. So the thing that I was kind of thinking about throughout this chapter in regards to mercy is whether or not mercy is requires intent on the part of the merciful, or if it can just be something that is experienced by the person who feels mercy. And I was kind of thinking about this in the context of in the LDS church, I feel like almost all the time when they talk about mercy, it's in contrast to justice. It's about mercy and justice are two sides of the same coin, and Christ is the perfect person because Christ knows how to navigate mercy and justice and is able to take the punishment for the justice and be merciful to us so that we don't have to suffer the justice of it. Whether or not that's good theology, I don't really know. It's not exactly what we're here for. But that was kind of the central question I had was, is mercy intentional or does it just happen?
Mercy has to be intentional because if you're not intending it, it's more like a fortunate coincidence. Like, oh, good, there's not a reading quiz today when I didn't do the reading. Is different than I know it's midterms and you're all struggling, so we're not going to do the reading quiz today, right? Those are two different situations. And so mercy is like a relational thing. I feel like it's when the person who doesn't have to bear a burden chooses to do it anyway, even though they don't deserve it, I guess is how I would define it.
The moment that kind of like stuck out to me as like raising this question of intentionality was when Kaladin said, like, is in the back and he's like, how can you lead from the rear? And he takes Rock's spot and becomes the leader. But he doesn't do it because he wants to save Rock or because he wants to save anyone on the front row. He's doing it because he wants to lead them and wants to help them run, but not necessarily to be merciful. But then Rock ends up responding to Kaladin's actions and seeing it as an act of mercy because he feels he would have died had he been on the front row. So that's where I was like, is this intent? Does it have to be intentional? Because Rock experienced it as mercy.
If we know anything about Cosmere magics, intent is important.
I was going to add just a little complication to Liz's idea of mercy being like an action. A complication that I do agree with Liz, where it's the mercy has to be like you give mercy to someone, you provide mercy. But when Elle was talking in the beginning, I kept thinking about Toni Morrison's last book, Mercy, and that A before mercy is like a mercy is something that is just an experience that you get, right? It's not someone providing that mercy for you. It's just a mercy of God or a mercy of, life itself. And so I think there is an aspect of life that culturally, I don't quite call it a mercy, but I think in like other cultural contexts or other spaces, like calling something a mercy can be a space where it's not an action, right? And so it's like a difference of like object, subject, and also perspective and point of view, right? Of like, there is mercy of action where it's like, I am providing that mercy that Liz is pulling out. But then there's that when the student gets when the exam is pushed off because the teacher says that they are providing the mercy, but the student who is experiencing that mercy is getting a mercy, right? It's a mercy moment. And it's like, so I think like if we're looking at it from the different perspectives of that, there is an action point of it, of the person who's providing mercy, who's giving it, but then there's also the person experiencing the mercy, which pulls into that moment of Rock is experiencing the mercy of Kaladin stepping in, right? And Kaladin is somewhat providing mercy in that way by being that step in, which, I mean, it's not an intent motivated act, right? Kaladin's not doing it for the purpose of being merciful, but in a sense it is mercy when you're looking at it from the outside. So I think like perspective here and point of view like broadens out that idea of mercy a little bit.
It reminds me of, I can't believe I just didn't remember it until now, the very, very Mormon feeling concept of tender mercies. That's a thing that comes up a ton.
I was just going to say TM, Elder Bednar.
Yes. The idea of tender mercies being a thing that you experience in your life that feels like an act of mercy, an act of somebody stepping in and giving you something that you don't feel you deserve. My like quintessential answer of like a tender mercy was my freshman year of college. I think something hard had been going on with like my family situation, and I ended up like sitting on the stairs of a building like tucked in a back corner in the JFB? I don't remember. The Joseph, one of the buildings. It's by the Talmadge at BYU. There's this little tiny
JFSB, Joseph Fielding Smith building. Or
the JFSB is the big one. I mean the tiny one.
Oh, the JKB?
The Jesse Knight building, the JKB.
But there's this little stairway in the back where like it feels a little hidden. And so I was sitting on the stairs and I was crying and like having this breakdown. And this random woman came up to me and just kind of like reached out to me and talked with me and helped me with some stuff. And then she invited me to dinner at her place that night. And it was just like someone like stepping in for me felt like a tender mercy to me. But it wasn't necessarily that there was like justice involved or like someone was interceding for me. It was just like someone was kind and that kindness felt like mercy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we could separate mercy from being the opposite of justice, because the other mercy that we see in the chapter is Kaladin's desire to care for the wounded, right? And this is reminding me of like anthropologists. One of the ways they determine when human civilization started is when you see skeletons that have broken bones that have been healed, right? And so this giving of mercy to those who, if we were going by strict law of nature, like they were not the fittest, they were injured, it's time for them to die. But those, when you decide instead to provide resources to them, even though they're not contributing to your group, that's when you see civilization happening, right? That we care for people who don't deserve it, maybe, or who aren't helping us in any other way. There's no exchange of goods happening. It's something we're doing for some other reason than because it is just or reciprocally advantageous, right? It's a feeling that like we owe each other something just because we're human, and that we care about each other because of that, and that like it would be wrong to leave wounded men behind. And so Kaladin's going to go through all this effort to try to save these bridgemen who nobody thinks their lives are worth anything.
I like this separating it from justice, because I do think when you're pulling from that in a Mormon context, you're pulling it from the Book of Mormon in a very specific sermon where the person's trying to get across the idea that God has these fundamental laws. You break them, justice is a consequence of that, right? You're now out of God's thing and mercy gets you back in. So I think it's a very process-oriented way of thinking about it. It's a very way of representing these large cosmological and theological ideas. I think one of the difficulties in Mormonism is now you're taking that and you're seeing mercy always through that lens, right? You're always seeing it in distinction to justice, right? You're always seeing it as a tension, as a pull. And I think cutting that and severing it is really important when God isn't in the equation, right? When the being of omnipotence and the being of all goodness is not in the equation, I think seeing justice and mercy as this interplay is not healthy, is not good, is not a way to become more Christ-like if you're seeing it through a Mormon space, right? Because the idea of mercy that you're pulling out here, right, is a mercy that is connected a little bit to charity. It's connected a little bit to caring, is connected a little bit to having a purity of heart where you're like not doing it for yourself. And I like that idea of mercy fitting in with those other ideas and not being as tied to that idea of justice.
Yeah, I really liked what Liz said of the idea of like a lack of reciprocation. Rock's response to Kaladin's mercy is to try to reverse it, to try to say, well, now I'm going to do something so I don't feel like I owe you something. But Kaladin never expects that from Rock because he took Rock's spot. He wants Rock to help because he wants the Bridgemen to all be involved and to be part of this, not because he thinks that he should save their life. And if Moash, for example, had been injured in this first bridge run, who's been so antagonistic towards Kaladin in this first section, Kaladin still would have healed him, even if Moash had been like, I'm never going to like be on your side, even if you do help me. Kaladin would have done it anyway. And that does feel merciful of him to do things without expecting the reciprocation.
And I think it's part of Kaladin's healing from part one of being, the wretch, depressed, to be able to offer mercy. First, it offers a great benefit to the person who is receiving the mercy, but I think it also, we got to pull in the Shakespeare, right? It's twice blessed. It blesses him that giveth and him that takes. So both the receiving of mercy, but also the giving of mercy is something that develops us as a human being. And I feel like it's filling this hole in Cal's soul that has been, made by all of the bad things that have happened to him, becoming a slave and being made to do bridge runs and feeling like his life has no purpose. And all of that he's dug down, but he's starting to slowly build up the meaning in his life. And the way that he's doing that is by offering mercy to people who don't deserve it or haven't earned it, maybe, because I think everyone deserves to, be cared for when they're sick.
One of the other elements of, or like times that I was thinking about mercy was when Kaladin is talking to the apothecary. And there are a couple of moments. One when the apothecary takes the dun sphere as opposed to the lit sphere, which is part of what ends up saving Kaladin, unbeknownst to him because he has the Stormlight. But then also because Kaladin says that he had tried to talk to the soldier surgeons who said that those are reserved for the real soldiers. Like, the Bridgemen can't have any of this stuff. And the apothecary is at least willing to give Kaladin some mercy. Like, he's not willing to undercharge him or charge him fairly for the supplies, but he's willing to at least consider giving Kaladin if he can afford it. And I was just curious if either of you had thoughts about that section, the way that the apothecary shows mercy to Cal.
I mean, that's more of a section of the chapter where we are seeing like mercy versus justice, because the sphere of business transactions is a very justice-oriented place, right? It's not a place where we're offering people stuff out of the goodness of our hearts. It's reciprocal exchange. What's a just and fair price for this? What can I get out of you? Even like less than justice. But the fact that he is willing to at least trade with Kaladin and to offer him this little bit that he can, it reminds me of, like, he's just an employee, and sometimes you don't have the authority to go beyond the bounds of your job. But sometimes you have the ability to do just a little bit, right? And knowing where the ability to extend mercy exists in your job can make your ability to live in that space a lot better, actually. I'm thinking back to when I worked Taco Bell as a undergrad, and like they made sure to know that it was no big deal if we had to remake orders because Taco Bell food costs nothing, like it to produce. And so they're like, look, just make people happy, and that goodwill comes back to us. So I feel like the best businesses do offer this mercy, and we're not quite there with the apothecary, but he's doing as much as I think he feels he's able to do in the situation that he works in Sadius's army, and he's also under economic pressures to, hold the line on things and reserve supplies for where they're needed.
I think that for me brings up a different question here about whether you can give mercy to someone who is like of a lower station than you, if there's a mercy providing there, or if it's like a providing a pity or some other form. But also a question of like, when you're in that sense of being in that enslaved environment, can you offer mercy to someone else when you are also in that? Is mercy only a term that works for people on equal footing, or can it be provided to other people? And perhaps it can't be. I don't want to quite put that forward as a answer, but just like as this question that pushes a little bit our thinking of mercy, because like I think the apothecary isn't, we could read it as providing mercy, and I think that's really generative, but I also think like reading it as being pitiful to a situation is something that also generates a different thought, right? Because Kaladin's not out of slavery in this moment. Being a bridge runner is still a form of slavery. You can't get out of that. You can't earn out of it. Can those who are not enslaved provide mercy to that? Or is that some other form of action, right? Do we have like, does reading it as mercy do it somewhat of a disservice is what I'm thinking through, I think.
Ironically, I think when I've always thought of mercy, I have kind of always thought of it as like an unequal position. Like you are inherently unequal, and it is the person with more ability or authority or whatever that offers mercy to the person with less. And that I think if you are on equal footing, it actually isn't necessarily about mercy, because you're saying, I have the ability, if you are the one being merciful, you're saying that I have the ability to demand more from you or to ask more from you, and I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to let you do something else instead. And there's no way that you could do that when you are on equal footing. Because I'm thinking like, for example, like in my relationship with my husband, if I was to ask him to do something that like maybe it's a chore or a task that I normally do, or he decides he's going to make dinner, for example, that feels merciful to me because I don't have the time tonight, so I need him to do it. I can do it, but it will be worse for me if I do it. But he has more time, more energy or whatever, and that is an inherently like unequal footing of you have more resources, so that act is merciful. Does that make sense?
I think it does, because I think inherently mercy is about giving where you don't have to give. And if usually that's when you are in a position of power, you're the one offering mercy, right? Because you have a choice not to give, or one who is in the right offering mercy to one who is in the wrong, right? You wouldn't offer mercy to someone who is already in the right. It works against that. It doesn't make sense. I was looking in honor of Elle, I have looked up the etymology of pity, which is really interesting, because I was like, the sense of pity we have nowadays kind of makes it negative. But if you go back to Middle English, it's like the sense of it is clemency or mildness. And that again invokes the sense of like a ruler offering a stay of a just punishment, right? I'm offering you clemency, I'm offering you compassion, or and it's also related to piety, of course, which is interesting. Apparently it replaced the Old English mild-heartedness with an O, which is interesting.
I guess I'm curious, like Adam, because I'm not my understanding has always been like the opposite of what you're saying. So I'm curious to hear more of how you got to the thought you're coming from of mercy is more merciful when it's about equality.
I think like the key difference for me is the fact that Kaladin has no agency or power in these moments. And where we see mercy, like in your personal life, right? Like you and your husband have somewhat of an equal sitting of power, right? You're not beholden to him in the way of like, you are forced to do bridge runs every single day, right? Or you are forced to go out into the cotton picking field and pick cotton. So like thinking of it where like, I think I fear reading it too much as mercy when there is no very strong sense of agency in Kaladin, kind of lessens the effect of mercy in some ways because of the systemic area that Kaladin is within in the space itself. And I think like it's kind of lifting him out of that. And so I think like I love the readings of mercy that we're doing, but I also just like want to temper it a little bit because of that lack of agency that Kaladin has, because of that lack of station, because he is still in a enslaved kind of format. And I think
I think I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, it's like there's inherent injustice in the relationship. And so the offering of mercy is really just an attempt to move closer to actual justice is what you're saying.
Also, I just want to I think what's coming out for me is a wariness of mercy being such a good thing. Especially growing up in Mormonism, right? We're taught be merciful. And I mean, in the New Testament, Christ even says to be merciful, right? And so like, I just like worry about reading that in a sense of such a positive type of thing when like this type of mercy, providing it to someone who is clearly in a very bad systemic way and you're repeating that systemic way yourself and treating them that way, right, is not a good thing. And for me, it tempers then mercy, right? Because usually I see mercy as like a very good thing, as something that's like very positive to provide. And so like, I think for me, it's tempering it in a little bit and seeing it in a different way because of that layer of Kaladin not having full agency in that moment. I think that fact that he is enslaved in this moment is really important to remember when considering whether it's mercy or not, or considering how it is mercy, I think. Because I think considering whether it is mercy or not is not really helpful, but considering how we see the mercy happening, right? The mercy from the apothecary to Kaladin is not, I wouldn't read it as positively per se, but like of Kaladin to Rock, I also wouldn't read that positively quite because they're still within that enslaved moment, right? They're still in that space of systemic hold over their ability to be agential people.
I think the thing that I would, I guess, counter that with is, to me, at very least, when Kaladin is making his actions like on the plateau, the fact that he has such limited agency and he chooses to be merciful with that agency does feel like it stands out. Kaladin chooses to use his limited funds to buy supplies to heal the bridgeman. He chooses to, instead of resting, he goes and finds people who are hurt and performs surgery and does these things to help them. In his limited amount of choices, he chooses to be merciful. And I think that is notable for the way that Kaladin is choosing. I think that there's definitely some validity to the idea of like the apothecary being merciful is maybe less of a good thing and more of a possibly like a guilt response sort of thing. It's not necessarily like, and especially because like it's also an economic context where there is kind of a trade-off, a bargaining, a barter, and the apothecary doesn't have to respond in the same way. I think that's valid. But I think when it comes to like Kaladin's actions, especially on the plateau, I think that the limited actions makes the mercy more valuable.
Yeah, and if we're going to decouple mercy and justice, I mean, the apothecary could start a revolution and try to free all the slaves and the bridgemen, and that would be enacting justice. Given that he doesn't necessarily have the ability to accomplish that, perhaps the best he can do as a single person is mercy. And though it doesn't like repair the unjust system or fix it, it is like you said about Kaladin, Elle, that like that's what he can do within his limited sphere. Is offer something instead of nothing, instead of refusing to take the done sphere because he's suspicious of this guy, just giving him the benefit of the doubt. That's offering mercy.
I guess maybe to bring that into the real life, like talking about like the systems of oppression as people that we're in, the idea of, is it enough to be merciful to someone else? And the answer is probably overall no. It's not enough. It doesn't fix somebody's life and get them out of oppression to be merciful to them. But like, is it enough to at least, when we can, to be merciful?
I think as well along with that, like the intent behind that mercy, to return to that idea, right, is really important. Why are you being merciful in that moment? Because I don't want to say that like, going back to the apothecary, leading the revolution is the mercy, right? Like that's not quite mercy per se. Like, but I think if your intent is to help and provide, that helps it read a little bit more as mercy, which the apothecary, that's obviously probably not the intent there. The intent is more like, how can I get this guy out of my way and give him some money, right? Especially thinking about the rags that he just boiled and then is selling at a very high price for just boiled rags that are like probably used and not great. And themselves are probably not a sanitary person. And like that intent part is really important. But I think it also begs the question of like, do people wake up and say, my intention here is to be merciful? Or is mercy a thing that's always seen in the rearview mirror, right? Do you walk up to someone and feel like, oh, in my heart, I feel that this is so bad that I need to provide a mercy to you? Is that intent there where you're actively doing a mercy to someone and you're seeing it as mercy? Is that mercy? Or again, to go back to that pity idea, are you pitying their situation enough that it has like brought up these bad feelings in you that you now want to provide something to them, right? Because you have more in this life than them. Is that mercy, or is that something else? Is I think what I'm trying to plumb a little bit is like, can you have an intent of mercy, or is that like an intent of pity for their situation, and so you want to help them out? Is that an intent that's driven by this sense of mercy? Right? So I think like it's just a complication of like, what is mercy exactly in my thinking?
So to pull in, I guess, Liz's world singing, and both of you are professors. I was an adjunct once, but it was like 9 years ago. So, and it was only for one semester. So my teaching career is very short. But I guess that question is, when you two are in situations where you have an option to be merciful to a student when you are grading, does that feel like mercy to you? Or do you think about it only in retrospect? Like Liz, thinking about in retrospect, this teacher from high school being merciful.
I mean, I write in my syllabus that I always intend to be merciful. That's like literally in my class policy. So there you go. That's how I feel about it. Like, I try to be merciful to students is always my goal, without being a doormat. But
I think for me, that comes out with, I always tell my students, I am firm on paper, a pushover in person. Which like is not an intent to be merciful, right? But it's like an intent to support and help them and recognize all the different structures in our life that cause us to be very busy. And holding that while also holding that like there are certain standards that we have to have in a classroom, right? And so I don't think I approach it with a sense of, I want to be merciful. I just approach it in a sense of, we all have life and let's talk about it and let's figure it out, but let's still be professional and mature about everything. I used mature a lot on my syllabus day yesterday, where I was like, let's just all be mature. But maybe I should start using merciful. Maybe let's all be merciful and see what happens. Maybe they'd all probably look at me really weird because I teach at a state school, and whenever I bring up God, they're always like, what is this guy doing? And I'm like, please don't get me fired, which I wouldn't get fired for bringing up God, because like I have a master's in religion, so I can talk about God, but no one else can. Kidding.
You're officially authorized by academia to talk about God.
This piece of paper right here that I'm pointing to on the YouTube, that authorizes me. It's written in Latin.
And Latin is more official. We all know.
Yeah. Thanks, Biggs Community College in upstate Boston. But anyway, I don't actively approach it with a merciful sense like Liz does.
So I guess I think the first question I had of does mercy require intent is the answer is no and yes. On the part of the merciful, it requires intent. On the part of the mercied, it requires no intent on the part of the merciful. You can experience a mercy without it having been intended to be a mercy. Like, I don't know. Let's be honest. I've heard some tender mercies at church that are like, the traffic light was green when it could have been red and it got me to church on time. And like, sure, is that a tender mercy? I guess. But like, there was no intent there. That was not that's not intent. That is an experience of mercy.
That also, it depends on your belief in what type of universe we live in.
That's fair.
Do we live in a mechanical cause and effect universe, or do we live in an enchanted universe where things can happen for reasons? I'm publishing a great essay about this, written by two of my friends in the first issue of my magazine. About, are you living in a sci-fi universe or a fantasy universe? And in a fantasy universe, things can happen for a reason. The traffic light can change for you.
I think this is a great time to move to our sacred reading, which we are going to bring Bibliomancy back. And for those of you who may just be tuning in and don't want to go back to one of our very first episodes, Bibliomancy is the practice of using a text to divine meaning, usually by randomly opening a book to a page and putting your finger on it and just saying, okay, what is this passage and why does it speak to me and what can I take from it? So we're all gonna grab a passage, come back and talk about them.
You're just picking a random page.
Yep.
Right? Okay.
Yep. And a random passage. I have one. I'm not going to do the one that I just barely missed, which was, you certain you don't want a love potion? To which my answer is, no, I don't want a love potion. I'm good.
I want one. Just kidding. As I said in the last episode, boys are gross and never touch them. They should be gone away with. We should all live in a feminist utopia on an island. No boys or men.
You also said, though, the wife wasn't going to work out, so...
Don't worry about that.
Exactly why he doesn't need the love potion.
All right. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Mine's on page 269, and it is Save Lives, which, pulling from last episode, just don't murder people. It's so simple. See, last episode I came out with the idea of don't murder people for plot, but murder them for other reasons. This is teaching me, instead of murdering people, let's save them. Thinking about it in relation to mercy, right? Whenever you provide a mercy, you are kind of saving someone. You are saving a life in many ways. And I think in our broader conversation of mercy, one thing that didn't come out is the latter part of Kaladin's character, where it's always the protection, right? It's the wind runner idea of protect, 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 which is mercy in and of itself, right? You see someone not being able, who needs to be saved. You see the life that needs to be saved. So you can just step in there to protect it. And I think that idea is merciful. And I think that is a way of performing and doing mercy when you save someone's life. And not just saving their life, pulling them out from a car or running over them or something, right? Or pulling them away from a cliff. I think saving a life is also just a smile. And as you're passing by someone, a sense of human connection, right? Can itself be a mercy and a saving of a life in some ways. That's what that makes me think of.
Okay, mine is from a little later in that chapter, which is just after he's trying to save one of the bridgemen. It says, finally he settled back, looking at the wounded man, completely drained. And this makes me think about just the relationship between energy and what we're accomplishing with the energy, that like you can be completely drained by lots of things. This is not a bad way to use all your energy. So am I using my energy that is limited towards things that matter?
I pulled from page 261 where Kaladin says, if you get caught in the dark, you'll have light. Referring to the glowing sphere that he trades the apothecary for. My thought I'm pulling out of that is I am actually scared of the dark a little bit. A little less so than I used to be when I was a kid, but I was definitely the sort that would like jump a little bit farther like onto my bed so that like theoretically nothing from under my bed would reach out and grab me. And like I don't love the dark. I've come around to it a little bit, but just thinking about the idea of the keeping a glowing sphere in my pocket or idea is coming. That's another thing that I'm now thinking about. I signed up for the Next Step coin as soon as Brandon announced it, basically. And I have been carrying it in my pocket nearly every day. And the days I don't is usually when I don't have pockets, so I can't carry it. And so it has been something to feel like a glowing sphere in my pocket of something that, because I'm dealing with depression, of a little something to keep me in the light or to remind me that there's light, even if it is very small. Yeah, just thinking about that.
I also jump into my bed when I turn off the light, but that's because my dog might come out and attack my feet. Because usually she's burrowed under the bed and she comes out and goes, and so that's why I jump into my bed when I'm going to bed. But I think it's okay to do that all the way until you're at least 92.
I super can't do that anymore. My spine is too fragile for any kind of jumping. No more jumping allowed.
All right, so we're going to conclude with our Wisdom of the Heralds, in which we talk about something that we want to take from this episode into our regular lives, as if our podcasting lives are irregular lives, which they kind of are. So as we've thought about the theme of mercy or other elements today, what do y'all want to take into your life?
I want to be more gracious about accepting mercy from people. I tend to highly value competence, and it is hard for me to ask for help and to accept help. So being willing to ask for that help and then just be grateful for it and let that go. And yeah, I think giving other people the opportunity to extend mercy is also important. Like, I do think it helps build us as people, the more that we are able to extend that grace to other people.
I think for me, one of the things I want to do better at going forward is making fewer assumptions about people. Coming into a situation or a relationship with fewer assumptions feels merciful, in that I am generally going to be assuming better of them than what I am. By not assuming stuff about them, I will assume better about what I expect from them or what they can do for me, or just more from the interaction. I think I do tend to be more assumptive of things, and I would like to be less.
No murdering. That's the wisdom of every podcast episode. No more murdering. I mean, what? I want to be more intentionally merciful, I think. Thinking through Liz's approach and her syllabus has me thinking a lot about that, but also just like more, I don't think I can get to the point of just like all open and free type of space when it comes to places that I hold power and authority over others, but I want to try to be a little bit more tactful and more intentional about that offering of mercy, and more open to it in a way where it's like not assessing everything and just like accepting it as like, this is a merciful moment and that's okay.
Thank you for joining us today on The Storming Journey. You can support our work on this podcast by subscribing to our Patreon, leaving a review, or sharing the podcast with a friend. We hope you'll join us next week, and in the meantime, remember, journey before destination.
So we're all gonna grab a passage, come back, and talk about them.
That means I have to go grab my physical book. 'Cause I don't have it in front of me.
Electronic books make it way harder to do bibliomancy.
They really do.
It's true.
What
It's a good
page
thing
are
I
we
have
on?
like 3 copies over there.
It's fine.
Don't worry. Don't ever ask how many copies of Brandon Sanderson books I have.
No, this is not an appropriate question.
No.